All right, Congresswoman Bass, let's just cut to the chase. This shutdown has been utterly stupid. We now have a deal
Yes.
that is virtually the same deal.
That's right.
Before there was even a shutdown.
That's
Senate passed a resolution 100-0.
Right.
The House could have taken it up.
Right.
It's the same deal.
Exactly. Exactly. But what's happened in the interim, I guess, has been a civics lesson for the president, who didn't seem to understand the powers he had and didn't have. Just like with the State of the Union. He thought that he could just march onto the floor of the House of Representatives and didn't understand that when Nancy Pelosi said you couldn't, that's, obviously the power that she has.
I think that's why there's a deal.
Exactly.
No, seriously. I think
Right.
the reason there's a deal is because he is so narcissistic and is all about big audiences that, oh, wait a minute, hold up. There was no walkthrough on Monday.
Right.
There's not going to be a speech. Oh man, no. So let's do a 3-week deal so I can get my speech on Tuesday.
Yeah.
I think that's what this is.
Well, there was one other factor that happened this morning, and that was the folks at the airport that all called in sick, and air traffic was blocked in New York and several other cities. That was ominous, and it was interesting because Congresswoman Lucy McBath in our caucus yesterday, she mentioned that she had met with a number of the airline workers, and they were saying that they weren't going to be able to go into work. You remember they told them to go drive Uber or to do garage sales. If people aren't bringing money in, they have to figure out a way to do it. Some of the workers might not have even had gas money, because you are talking about people who are very low-paid workers, whether you were talking about TSA or otherwise. So I think that, along with the straw, that being the straw that broke the camel's back, couldn't get his speech on Tuesday, and then also the air traffic being blocked.
And I think that, because first of all, we had talked about this on this show yesterday, and I said, folks, if the airport people say, ain't nobody flying.
Exactly.
I said, this country will look like 9/11.
Exactly, that's
where
right.
there were no planes in the air.
I just hope that the workers recognize their power, because it's not over. This is just extended for 3 weeks. And what he's going to find, just like the last deal he agreed to, he got beat up by the right wing. Ann Coulter, Rush Limbaugh, I guess who he listens to more so than his cabinet. They got mad at him when he made the last deal. They got mad at him when he made a speech. I know they're going to beat him up today. He's the one who said that he could go into Times Square, shoot somebody, and everybody would still love him. But yet when Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh spanked him, he then runs away from the deal. I frankly hope that we vote either by unanimous consent or everybody comes back to D.C. immediately, because he's liable to change his mind again.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. And that's why one of the first questions that I asked my staff was, all right, when is this vote?
Right.
No, literally, when I came in, I said, is Congresswoman Bass still coming in?
Yeah.
I said, because are they voting in an hour? Because the reality is,
exactly.
Let's go back to December.
Right.
Vice President Pence tells the Senate, yes, pass this deal, and Trump is going to sign it.
Right.
The Senate passes this, unanimous consent, 100-0. Then by the next morning, he tells Paul Ryan, oh, hell no, absolutely not. I'm not going to sign it. I need a wall.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, Paul Ryan comes out and says, hey, he wants a wall, so we got to pass a different bill.
But to show you how ridiculous it is, I don't know if you saw his speech, Roland, but he talked about a steel wall that you could see through. I didn't know you could see through steel. But that's what he said. But just think about this for a minute. Republicans have always been the party that opposed eminent domain. Well, how do you think the wall would be built? That's not just free property there. You're talking about the property of ranchers. You're talking about Native American reservations. And eminent domain would be tied up in court.
And the only member of Congress where 42% of his congressional district is that border is Republican Will Hurd.
That's right.
Who has said this is a myth. This is nonsense. This wall should not be built.
Well, when he went to the border, when Trump went to the border, all of the Border Patrol people sat there and did a presentation to him about tunnels. So you can build whatever wall you want. What about the tunnels? And if you're worried about the drugs that come in, the drugs come in through the ports of entry in trucks. The people who are half starving from Central America aren't bringing in major drug trafficking. So it's ports of entry that the drugs are coming in. The whole thing was a farce. Some of my colleagues called it a vanity wall. I think that's absolutely the case. It never made any sense. But he's still threatening us because what he said is that he's going to give us 15 days to negotiate his wall. And if in 15 days we don't give him the money, then he's going to use his emergency powers. Well, go right ahead, President Trump, and do that. Because the minute you pull the trigger on the emergency powers, you're going to be tied up in court.
Well, he's not necessarily won in court a lot, especially over the last couple of years. I got to ask you this here. All of a sudden, we're seeing candidates jump into the race.
Yes.
Senator Kamala Harris jumped in on Monday.
Yep.
You have the governor out of Indiana. He is forming an exploratory committee.
Oh.
You have Senator Bernie Sanders, who hasn't jumped in, but he's sort of quasi-running and all that sort of different stuff. What is your message to these candidates? What do you want to hear them talk about specifically for black folks?
Well, first of all, I'm not dismayed by the fact that there are, a lot of candidates in the race. I think the Democratic Party and the American people need to have that discussion. But in terms of African Americans, I want to hear specificity. I mean, you're talking about an administration right now who has from day one tried to reverse everything we've won over the last 6 or 7 decades. I want to know how we're going to put it back together again. And not just put it back together, but move us a step forward. Let me give you a very specific example. We need infrastructure. We need major transportation projects. So we eventually, let's say we pass a bill under the next administration. Well, how are you going to target that so that African Americans actually get the jobs and the training, et cetera? So passing major pieces of legislation like that without specificity for how it's going to help our community can bypass us. We've seen this happen all the time.
Well, what this administration has already done is that they have also went back to bundling contracts that makes it harder for a smaller firm to be able to compete for the prime contract. And so then there only are subcontractors and only major firms can get those. And so that's how, and so I tell people all the time what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta when he broke apart the large contracts, broke them into smaller prime contracts so black contractors could then be able to apply for those prime contracts, get them, and then control larger share of the dollars as opposed to just being a sub.
Well, and in addition to that, the other thing the administration did is took away provisions for local hire for federal transportation dollars. So believe it or not, if you have money from the federal government for a transportation project and you as a city or a county want to give preferential treatment to people who live in the neighborhood that the project is coming through, you can't do that. It is, but that's one of the ways, because we know that affirmative action has been gutted, right? I mean, we should have had that back, with goals. But given that we don't have that back right now, if you put in local hire provisions, you do have a much greater chance and opportunity for African Americans who look out of the window, drive down their street, see major projects, and no African Americans on the workplace. So those are things that could be done and that I would like to see the next administration do.
We do want to get your thoughts on this. GQ dropped their article with Bernie Sanders. It was done in October. In the article, he talked about where he said race is obviously a huge issue, but he thinks that class is a larger issue. How can you divorce race from class?
Well, let me just tell you, if that is your viewpoint, then basically what you will say is you will turn a blind eye to institutional racism. If you don't have the ability to understand that in the United States, 243 years, why do we still have the inequity? We have the inequity because of institutional racism. So it is alarming to me that Senator Sanders would still say that. And maybe that's why in King Day a week ago, now he's beginning to talk about race. If in the United States you do not talk about race, then you are essentially giving a blind eye and you are complicit to institutional racism.